I'll never forget it. December 11th. Glorious day for Off the Grid. Well, for some people. You might be asking yourself, what's so special about December 11th? Well, for those who did not know, December 11th was the glorious introduction of new aim assist and controller updates. And what we're going to talk about is the impact that this has had on the game since its inception. I recently did a video the other day where folks were kind of getting on me about my opinions calling aim assist an aimbot. So before I move forward with this video, the very first thing that I would like to do is be honest. I am not anti-aim assist. I am not saying that aim assist does not need to be included in the video game. I think console players need to have this in order to have any chance at competing with PC players. I'm just not a fan of all the different excuses that are made to try and defend your point. I also have spent a lot of time in the community speaking with other players who are very experienced at the game, and they too understand where I'm coming from. We don't need to get rid of aim assist. We need to turn it down a notch. The second thing I think we need to talk about is crossplay. Am I anti-crossplay? Absolutely not. In fact, I think crossplay is a beautiful thing, especially for PC players, as we were struggling to maintain full lobbies on a regular basis somewhere around late November into early December. And once they introduced crossplay, things were a lot better. And unfortunately, the month before that in November, Xbox players had to deal with playing against PC players, and there's a large percentage of people who are very disgruntled from that experience because they were not given aim assist. Now, before we move forward, let's talk about averages. Most players are going to aim. If you are learning and excelling at the game and you know what you're doing, I'm not talking about bots. I'm not talking about your girlfriend who ran into the living room with excitement. I'm not talking about your 7-year-old brother. And frankly, I don't care about any of those people. I like to have competition when I play games. People who want to go have fun, that's what Fortnite's for. That's what regular creative mode and sandbox games are for. They can go play Harry Potter for all I care. But what I do care about is a level playing field. So before we get into some more technical things in this video, we're going to talk about statistics. Because numbers don't lie, people do. And the very first thing that I'd like to go ahead and do is transition back to something I had talked about a couple weeks ago. And we're going to make sure we keep that date in our head, that December 11th date in our head. And to kick this off, we're going to compare a top 50 console player versus a top 50 PC player. In fact, I'm going to compare a top 50 console player against a top 3 PC player to really drive home my point. And again, remember those averages, anywhere from 30 to 45%. That is where a decent player should be shooting. If you take a look at these specific metrics, this is from S. Al-Rakia's stats, and this is before aim assist has been reduced. You're going to notice he is meeting those ranges I had talked about. And we can see with consistency, he was already performing at a high level. There's a lot of players who are making their way over from games that are dying, such as Apex Legends and Call of Duty, who have spent the last 5 or 6 years mastering their skills on controller. If you were to continue scrolling up, you're going to notice this is December 11th. And what do we see? We went from that 30 to 45% average all the way up to 50s and 60s. Now that he spent all day fine-tuning his controller settings and beginning to master his new and improved Aimbot, if we were to continue scrolling up even higher, we are now seeing consistent percentages in the 60s, sometimes even as high as 70% or 69.5%. And if we were to keep scrolling up, you'll notice that that is pretty much the status quo for this particular player moving forward. How did we get from 30 to 45 all the way up to as high as 50 to 70% accuracy? That is not a level playing field, to keep it simple. If I were to compare that to the number 3 PC player in the world, I don't even have to worry about wasting time going all the way back to December 10th because nothing has changed for him, only his competition. But you're going to notice for a guy who gets just as many kills as the other one, the accuracy is right within the range that I had told you. We are seeing things anywhere from 30 to 45%. And on a really good day, we're beginning to edge as high as 49%, and I'm sure he hits 50% on a regular basis. Now, if we were to go to their overview stats, you're going to notice that these are very similar players to compare. S. Alarica is 6.9 and has a 67.3% win rate. And I should also mention plays with the number 1 leaderboard player in the game. So comparing him to the number 3 PC player who has a 7.6 KD ratio and has a 63.7% win rate is very, very fair. I hope you're able to notice that these are very similar to one another, but the consistency in terms of aiming at a higher percentile lies within the console players. I'm all for evening the playing field. I really, really, really am. But the thing I want to drive home for all of you is that when you are playing in a community that is 85%, 85% of the players are you on PlayStation 5 or Xbox, you have to stop saying rude statements like, let's get rid of the PC players. Let's turn off crossplay. Boy, I can't wait for the day that they turn off crossplay. Why? You're still going to get your shit pushed in, and you're still going to be losing game after game against a guy who's regularly dropping 20 bombs every other game. Oh, but those PC hackers. Show me the proof. If you get killed in the game, I suggest that you look the player up. 9 times out of 10, they will be on PlayStation 5. In fact, I want to give extra extreme props to the devs because they have done a phenomenal job at getting rid of any type of extreme cheat that's injector related or kernel based. And don't get me started on the potentiality of console players using Zens and Zims, but nobody ever wants to have that discussion because they're too busy talking about how you get to use your whole arm, the difference in their frames, the pulling rate variance, or whatever excuse that they would like to cope to make themselves feel like they aren't improving at the video game. At the end of the day, people, if you invest into the game, you love this game, and you play this game, you will get better at it. Stop rushing the process against players who have been playing for months at a time. Last but not least, I've said it time and time again, look at the leaderboards. There's a reason the number 1 player is on PlayStation 5, or maybe the number 4, or the number 6, or 7, or 9, which makes up 50% of the top 10 players. In fact, if I were to decide to scroll down this list, you're going to pretty much on a regular basis see that Xbox and PlayStation 5 players are competing with the best of them. Not everybody who picks up a controller is a casual. Some people like to play video games and came from other games with vetted experience. I understand you want your 7-year-old brother and your sister and your girlfriend to be able to play video games with you, but I just don't think Off the Grid is really that type of game. They might be aiming to try and get that market share of players, but those aren't the ones that are going to stick around. They're going to be busy wanting to play the Harry Potter and the next God of War release and probably some, I don't know, PlayStation 5 single player game that's going to enthrall them and keep them focused for hours. Or maybe they want to hop into a sandbox experience. But that doesn't mean that the developers have to completely shift and change the landscape of the entire game. Not only was there adjustments to the aim assist that, in my opinion, again, were a little too overtuned, the overall speed and momentum of the game is a lot slower than it ever was before, making it, again, even easier for casual players to be able to compete. And my main goal for you all to take away from the last video I had posted that it angered so many people is that the devs have increased the rectangle around the player model, which means you can quite literally beam shots on a player without even hitting them. And that is something that needs to be improved because slowing down the speed, giving you an aimbot and a massive box to still be able to hit a moving target starts to really become an over exaggerated attempt at, quote, evening the playing field. That's really all I got to say on this. I didn't want to keep this section too long because now we're going to deep dive into some real nerdy shit. Topic number 1 is going to focus on game engines. With the introduction of Unreal 5, what's important for a lot of you to understand is that these games are not fully developed. Instead of spending hours upon hours sculpting beautiful environments and shapes in vivid detail, what most of these developers are doing instead is simply creating one basic texture and then allowing AI generation to help auto-populate the rest of the frames and texturings throughout the entire universe. Now, there's a big sacrifice in performance when this happens. You're usually going to have a GPU, whether it's on console or on PC, attempting to scale up. We use the term upscaling what you see in front of your eyes. It makes the game look pretty, but it has a major impact on performance overall. I figured sometimes I could be a little bit long-winded, so why not go to somebody who really knows how to effectively explain this for the simple mind? We're going to take a look at a video very quickly that I think will be able to kind of give you the gist of why I don't want to hear your excuses about frame versus frame performance. And after the video, we're going to pull up some footage of people who are playing the game on either platform and show you that it's really not as big of a gap that you think it is. And then we'll move into some of the hardware things like peripherals versus a controller. Check it out.
Now, let's talk about this. So what actually is frame generation? Does it really double frame rates? What are the downsides? Is it a gimmick or is it a game changer? Well, let's quickly sum up what it is. And I know some of you guys already know, but just short version. Basically, what it does is it delays showing you a real frame that the game engine has generated in order to insert an AI-generated fake frame right before that. And it does this every other frame, which is how it can almost double frame rates, although in reality it's usually a little less than doubling, and in some cases a lot less than doubling. And I'm not quite sure why it doesn't always just double it, but there must be some kind of overhead going on in there. Now, this brings up some obvious issues, and this is where the people saying this is an absolute gimmick are coming from. Notice I said it has to delay showing you a real frame in order to insert a fake frame before it. That means it does increase the latency of the game. It decreases the game's responsiveness when you're playing it. Now, the other thing is these are fake frames. In other words, this frame is not generated by the game engine, so it is not responsive to your inputs, and you're not actually seeing any like if you're playing a competitive game, if an enemy peeks out from behind a corner, even though you have more frames, you will actually see that later than when it actually would have happened if you were not using DLSS frame generation. At least if you have reflex enabled on both of those, then that's a whole other thing. But anyway, the point is it slows down the responsiveness of the game, and these are AI generated frames, which means they don't look as good as real frames. Some of them look almost as good or almost indistinguishable, but there can be weird things that happen to the image quality because it's taking the next frame, it's taking the previous frame, and it's taking some information from the game engine, motion vectors, things like that, to get an idea of where things on the screen are going. But sometimes it just does not have information about certain parts of the image, or it guesses wrong about what those would look like, and then that gets you frames that don't quite look right. Now, here's the problem though. When you judge it based on all of those problems, this absolutely sounds like a marketing gimmick that nobody would ever use. It slows down your game and it looks bad. However, that's not the experience I've had actually using it in certain games. Although I think this is a very game-to-game subjective idea. So let's talk about that.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and pause it right there for a moment because, to be honest with you folks, this actually was a different time in gaming. This is your 2019 to 2020 era of gaming. You might be going, well, what does that have to do with today? Well, now we are in the era of Unreal Engine 5. And instead of other games really focusing on driving high performance and bringing to life those textures, now we have taken the more lazy route and rely on AI. And AI is going to be carrying the game. Now, in this video, you're getting educated on basic frame generation. With Unreal Engine 5 and newer graphic cards, such as the 50 series, you are going to be focused on a concept of multi-frame generation. And it's going to rely on all kinds of variables coming from the engines itself, such as lighting, lumen effects, shadow technology, and so much more. If you would like to learn a little bit more about this, there's a really great video called Why Unreal 5 is Killing the Gaming Industry. And I encourage you all to jump on YouTube and just watch it. It's really educational, and I think it will help you see gaming in a different light. And more importantly, it'll probably make you a little angry at some of these game developers who are trying to cut corners and deliver an unfinished product. Now, what I'd like to do now is transition into talking about inputs. One of the comments that I had in my video said that controllers do not have the same input as a mouse and keyboard. And I got bad news for you, bud. It's simply not true. And rather than sit there and try and articulate this through some massive paragraph, we are going to take a look at some proof through AI using the internet. Let's take a peek. All right, so here is a example platform or software that most folks are going to have if you own a high-end gaming mouse. Logitech has it, SteelSeries has it, and me personally, I own a Glorious gaming mouse. Now, for a long time, and honestly, still today, most people don't want to spend $100 on a peripheral. So that Microsoft keyboard that you're using or that Microsoft mouse, 9 times out of 10 is going to be performing somewhere in the range of 125 hertz, and most newer hardware is going to be somewhere around 250 hertz. Now, for those who did not know, the average PlayStation controller is going to also be polling at roughly 250 hertz. I decided to Google standard polling rate of a basic PlayStation 5 controller, and yes, it is exactly the same as a computer, meaning that the response of it bouncing back and forth and sending its continued polling rate, right, is the same as somebody who has an average peripheral. Average controller is actually performing at the same rate. But notice it says here that the DualSense Edge controller has a polling rate of 1000 hertz. Xbox's newest, most state of the art controller also polls at 1000 hertz. Now, if you take a look at the polling rate in my software, the maximum I can tune my mouse to is also 1000 hertz. Now, how many hertz is a elite AA, Battle Beaver, or Scuff controller? Well, they are also going to be 1000 hertz. So, this hopefully immediately debunks any sort of claim that there's a disadvantage in terms of response time related to your controller versus a mouse and keyboard. Now, we're going to get really nerdy in this next section, but I think it's super important to talk about. I'm going to pull up a video very quickly that highlights really some of the differences when it comes to what you're seeing. So I'm going to slide that on over and let's see if I can get that opened up here. We'll slide that on over and I want folks to take a closer look. So this is an example of multiple games and the differences between the response time. A lot of things play a factor. Are you playing on a gaming monitor that has a faster refresh rate? Or are you playing on some massive 85-inch 4K TV? That is going to create a lot of delay. And it doesn't matter whether you're on PC or console, the screen is going to be a difference maker. The resolution of that screen is going to be a difference maker. You want to play on a 4K screen, you are going to get some 4K delay. You want to play on a 2K screen, you are going to get some 2K delay. But if we were to even the playing field and just assume that both players were going to be using somewhere around 120 hertz screen, which is pretty standard today, and playing on 1080p, the performance gains are not that far apart. Now, as you can see, this is going to be measured in response time. And a PlayStation 5 can actually outpace NVIDIA reflex games if it's not using said feature, which reduces the latency time. Lower is better. So we notice here in Call of Duty, for example, 44.49 is much better than PC at a 51.3. Now, once we start to crank on some features that, yes, you do not have on your PlayStation and Xbox, we begin to see the gap close. Now, one thing I want to tell you is most players are not using NVIDIA Reflex because even though it reduces latency time, there's a lot of developers who haven't properly optimized this into their games and it causes bugs and glitches. And Off the Grid is one of those games. You're going to also oftentimes hear the term motion boost, and it is basically the same thing as this reflex feature. Now, VSync is something that people may be able to take advantage of on like a Pro series, and you're going to notice that the latency is somewhere around 10 to 12 milliseconds different than what you see here from a PlayStation 5. And again, I'm going to argue that most players are not going to have VSync on because usually they think more frames equals more better. And unfortunately, as we learned from the last video, that's simply not true. Now, as we can see here, NVIDIA Reflex off with LLM enabled, we begin to start evening the playing field. In fact, in games like Fortnite, we are superior in terms of input time. In games like Destiny 2, we are superior in input time. And quite frankly, if somebody has spent $2,000 while you spent a measly $500, I think 10 to 20 seconds, or excuse me, milliseconds is pretty rare and reasonable, and to the human eye isn't going to be that noticeable. Usually, hardcore gamers are going to be the ones who can see and feel the difference between these two things. And as you can see, if we were to take a look at NVIDIA Reflex being turned off, which most gamers do, you are right on par in terms of speeds in comparison. And in rare cases, we're actually suffering a much higher input delay. So, all of that hoo-ha, roo-rah about how you're suffering and that you get a delayed input time, here we are again, debunking said claims. If players are smart and know how to optimize their PC experience, they too will be able to optimize and actually beat what you get on your PlayStation. Now let's talk about that. How many of you out there as PC gamers own a 30 series or a 40 series? After COVID struck, those cards were marked up out of the woozah. In fact, I'm betting my bottom dollar the vast majority of gamers today upgraded to a 30 series card in the mid range, probably to a 3060 or a 3070, and if you had a little bit of extra pocket change, you dumped your money on a 3080. The rest of those gamers are still using 10 and 20 series cards, such as 1070s, 1080s, or 2070s, supers, and 2080s. And for those who aren't very educated on, well, what's inside of my PlayStation 5, those are far, far less cards than what you have in these new state-of-the-art systems. So you might be asking yourself, well, what is in my system? What's in my PlayStation? Why is Holosightz saying that, we got really great GPUs? Well, because you do. Remember how I said earlier that during COVID, getting your hands on a 30 series was near impossible? Well, let's ask an AI. What kind of GPU is equivalent to an Xbox Series X? And you're going to notice that it is equivalent to an RTX 3060 Ti or a Radeon RX 6700 XT. Cards that at some point were extremely difficult to get your hands on. Now, a lot of those top players are not on Xbox. So let's switch it up. What is it equivalent to in a PlayStation 5? Well, you are equivalent to a 66, 67, or even sometimes a 6800 Radeon card. Or if we were to maybe take a look at that in NVIDIA terms, drumroll, a RTX 4060 or an AMD 7700 are roughly equivalent to folks using a PlayStation 5 Pro. We have completely skipped generations, and you are now playing with the big boys who have a 40 series card. Now, a regular PlayStation 5 is also usually going to be compared to somewhere, I'd say, around a 3070 or a 6800 XT, whereas the Xbox, again, was a step down being compared to that 3060 and a 6700 XT. You're welcome to do your research on this, folks, but stop playing the victim all the time and acting like you're playing on some type of system from 1992. Now, if you're playing some of these games on a PlayStation 4 or the original Xbox One, I get it. It's probably not going to be an optimized experience. But I need folks to understand what kind of technology exists in the consoles today. It is not 2019 anymore. It is 2025. And when you are experiencing problems with your video games, it is the developer's fault for relying on AI frame generation and not spending more time making a beautiful, optimized game. Now, I hear a lot of folks, such as the guy who was in my comments section, mentioning that, well, he gets as low as 25 frames. So I thought to myself, what if I went online and found a PlayStation player to compare? So I did exactly that. And I watched him for about an hour. And the first thing that I want to tell you is not once did I ever see him fall to 25 frames. In fact, to the human eye that sees at 30 frames per second, an optimized experience or game usually wants to double that and deliver 60 frames per second. If we take a look during the more clear images of this particular video, you are going to notice he regularly is between 50 to 60 frames. In addition to that, when he does get into some conflict or some sort of fight, his frames dropped maybe as low as 35 to 40 frames, which again, by technical standards of game development, is a playable experience for gamers. Now, if you were to stack in some of the other qualms or problems with games such as latency issues or input delay, it can start to feel like the game is kind of awful for you. But I've already debunked the differences when it comes to input delay. So anything you're experiencing on console, I promise you, the PC players are experiencing it too. And one of the big problems with, in particular, Unreal Engine 5 is a memory leak. So that means everyone at some point experiences a massive drop in their frames, almost freezing, and then stuttering, and then the game returning back to its normal full force. By the way, this guy is 8-Bit Jerry, and I just popped into his stream. So if you ever want to go check him out and say hello, he's on Twitch. Stop by and let him know I said hi. Now, you might be asking yourself, oh, what about PC? So I said, that's a great idea. Let me go ahead and switch gears. I went ahead and swung on over to one of my favorite guys in the community. We call him What a Week TV, and he plays for one of the best teams and orgs in Off the Grid. And if you take a look at his frames, he does have a much better computer, but I want you to remember, since he's using an NVIDIA card, he is using frame generation. And you'll notice he is averaging somewhere around the ballpark of 117 to 120, and he even has dips as low as 70 to 80. And yes, folks, he does play on a controller. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you folks out there who are using a PlayStation Pro, you are performing at the same performance as this particular graphics card as he is using a 4080. Now, let's take a look at one more example because I feel like I gotta double down for the console deniers. Here's another mid-tier, top performing PC controller player. And he doesn't even break 100 frames. In fact, he usually averages somewhere between 75 to 90 frames on the high. And I'm gonna be honest with you again, most, and I do mean most, of the entire gaming community is going to have a system similar to this particular player. And also, I gotta plug my boy, Veckenstein. You are a beast, and if you want to learn how to really move and kick some ass on these games, stop by Veckenstein's channel sometime. He's a great content creator and really does a great job at just giving different insights and advice for players who are wanting to grow and improve at the game. One thing I also want to call out is that I heard something in my comment section, or I read rather, is that there's a PC flick shot. If you didn't notice that last clip that we were checking out, you know, swooping in and killing people, this is a controller player. This isn't a mouse and keyboard player. Why are you bringing this up, Hollow? Because what's important for a lot of you copers to take home with you is that if you put some time and effort and dedicate to a game, you can aim just as good as he does, whether it be on controller or whether it be on mouse and keyboard. I figured we don't really need to look at PC players because anybody with a KD like this guy who's playing on PC is going to be pulling off just as sick of shots. And honestly, Vekken often plays with a Kestrel. If you need another example of this, maybe go check out players like Locked and Saucy, Tameless, or Merciless as well, has been playing a lot on controller. In fact, I even think he has switched over to his Xbox, where he is averaging a 10 plus KD and winning day in and day out. So, what I really want you folks to just take home is please stop spitting out the same stupid recycled trash excuses that you were using when you were trying to argue with people in the Call of Duty forums, or you were using to argue with the Fortnite and Apex players. It is not 2018 anymore, okay? We live in the future. If you are playing on a basic bitch console, my advice is you upgrade. Maybe go get a little bit better version of that console. Trade yours in and go upgrade if you possibly can. Otherwise, yes, you will be at a performance disadvantage. You know, when people get into sports or activities in the real world, usually when they invest into better equipment and better training items, they have better results. Quit asking the developers to hold your hands, put the bumpers up, give you the batting tees, or more importantly, give you freaking aimbot aim assist that you never needed. Tune it down by 10%, and we all can be in a happy place. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I am curious what some of your thoughts are. And if I've managed to break a few of your hearts and you're no longer interested in my content, that does really disappoint me, as my number one goal is to just bring us together, but help clarify what exactly we're fighting and arguing about. Can we just maybe get on the same page and suggest that these devs do a much better job at actually developing their game and put their commitment into the community? I have plenty of other videos kind of going really hard on this particular studio for needing to do a better job, and there are other people who have done the same. If you stopped by, thank you. You are appreciated. I'm going to wrap things up, and before I go, peace, love, and happiness. Y'all be easy.